It was late autumn, and it was almost 7 p.m. on the clock. An old woman in her 70s was standing at a bus stop at the edge of the woods, waiting for a bus. The woman's name was Helen, and today would have been her 50th wedding anniversary if her beloved husband were still alive. They loved each other and lived in perfect harmony. They had bought a small house by a lake in the woods, hidden from public view, when they were young. They often came here together to take a break from the bustle of the town. Helen missed her husband very much and always came here on their wedding day. She usually spent the whole day walking around, remembering their days together, because every little thing in this cottage reminded her of her husband and the happy days here. She also tidied up the house and grounds a bit. Some would call it foolishness, but the woman believed that this house was her bond with her husband, which should be cherished as well as her memories of him. This time the old woman finished her work a little later than usual. She usually asked her neighbors for a ride into the town or to the bus stop. But this time they were out of the house. Helen did not use her cell phone and could not call a cab. But that didn't scare the woman. She had walked more than once to the bus stop, which was 5 miles away. The old woman took her Nordic walking sticks and walked. She didn't wait 10 minutes for the last bus to arrive. She got on and was about to pay when she realized that she had forgotten her wallet. The old woman was confused, but she came up to the driver and told him about her problem. She hoped that he would take her venerable age into consideration, and that it was almost nighttime outside, especially since it wasn't more than 10 miles to the town. But the driver, whose name was Brian, was having a very bad day today. Several passengers were rude, and there was also a group of young people who practically got into a scuffle on the bus. And most importantly, the company was going to have layoffs, and Brian was very worried that he could be fired. He had a family to feed, and he dreadfully thought what would happen if he was fired. That is why that old woman who forgot her purse completely threw him off balance. He pushed the woman off the bus, closed the doors and drove off. Brian thought angrily that no one was doing him anything for free, and such old ladies took advantage of their age. The old woman tried to shout something to the driver, but the bus kept going further and further away. When it disappeared around the bend in the road, she stopped and tears appeared in her eyes. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. Frost had appeared on the grass, and it was clear that it was going to be a very cold night. She had no idea where to go or what to do. The old woman was cursing herself that she had forgotten her purse. She could have gone back to the cottage, but the woman walked slowly down the road into the town, hoping to catch a passing car. Although she walked slowly, she quickly grew tired. Her legs were less and less obedient. It had already become dark, and the road was deserted. The woman felt a little scared, but she did not despair. She blamed herself not only for the forgotten purse, but for the fact that she should have dressed warmer, because it was not summer outside. Her strength was running out. And in the meantime, Brian finished his trip and returned home to his wife and son. He was in no mood at all. The threat of being fired, the inadequate passengers, and then there was that woman. Her gaze asking for help did not give him any peace. He could not sleep for a long time. He kept seeing that old woman before his eyes. Suddenly Brian with horror thought, what if she was still outside on such a cold night? It was past midnight, but Brian got up quickly, got dressed and got into his old car. He drove to the bus stop where he had left her. That night the first snow fell. The man drove to that place, but did not find the old stranger at the bus stop or on the road. Brian was relieved to think that someone had given her a ride. But doubts continued to torment him. He could not get out of his mind how badly he had acted. Brian understood perfectly well that he had unleashed his anger at himself for his unfortunate life upon this innocent old woman. But anyway, he forever remembered her eyes and the date when it happened, the 15th of October. A few days later he quit. Working at a job that brought him neither pleasure nor money suddenly became unbearable, and he could no longer drive that route. Life continued. Over time, Brian found a better paying job and gradually worked with his beloved wife to buy their own home. This was their goal. The couple was tired of living in rented apartments. Moreover, their son was about to start school, and they had to decide what school to attend. And so they found a good offer. The real estate agent said that the apartment was inherited by the owner from his grandmother, and he lived in another state. That's why the price was a little lower than market. The apartment needed some cosmetic repairs, but Brian was happy with that. The family moved into a new apartment. It was decided to throw out the old furniture and buy new ones. Behind the closet, Brian found several women's handkerchiefs and an old photo album. He took it in his hands, and it would have been better if he had not opened it. The man began leafing through it and became less and less aware of what was going on. The same old woman he had dropped off the bus in the freezing cold 2 years ago was looking at him. Brian found it difficult to breathe. When he came to his senses, he understood that he had to find out what had happened to that woman. Otherwise he would have no peace. Brian contacted the former owner of the apartment but did not get any answers. The man only told him that his mother's cousin lived in the apartment, with whom he had no contact. The notary notified him about the inheritance. How and when she died and where she was buried he did not know. The guy said something else, but Brian could no longer hear. This apartment was a heavy burden on Brian's heart. In the end, he was able to convince himself that he had nothing to do with the tragic end of the former landlady. But he could not justify his inhuman act, and he was very remorseful. In time the story was forgotten. One late January evening, Brian's car stalled far from the town. It was snowstorming, so visibility did not exceed 10 meters. There was no cell phone service. The man had driven here many times, and knew that a few miles away there was a small village where it was possible to ask for help. He checked his navigation device to see if there was a shortcut through a small forest. He took a flashlight from the car and went to get help. After walking a little way through the woods, he realized that the road ended in a cemetery. He checked with the navigator once more, and saw that the road went through the cemetery and exited to the village. He didn't want to go through the cemetery at night, but he didn't have any strength to go back and walk around. Especially as the snowstorm intensified. Brian overcame meter after meter of his way. Gravestones and monuments surrounded him on all sides. The snow flew under his hood and he couldn't even feel his fingers anymore. At one moment Brian took an awkward step, slipped and fell down. For a moment he was unconscious, but when he came to his senses and raised his head from the snowdrift he was dumbfounded. From the tombstone, Helen was looking at him. The date on the monument was written in black paint, October 15th. He couldn't walk any further, he hurt his leg when he slipped. He tried to crawl, but his frozen hands and feet would not listen and nothing worked. Hopelessness overcame his consciousness. He looked at Helen's picture and cried out that he asked for her forgiveness, and that he was very sorry for doing such a bad thing to her. Brian tried to say something else, but his strength was already failing him. He made one last attempt to get out, but he couldn't, so he remained lying on the cold ground in the middle of the cemetery. But at that moment a miracle happened. The cemetery keeper noticed some small light near one of the graves. Whatever the weather, it was his duty to keep an eye on the graves. He dressed warmer and went to see what it was. As he got closer he found a flashlight. He shined a little nearby and saw Brian covered with snow. The man rushed to help. He dragged Brian to the guardhouse and called an ambulance. The man was saved, but he had months of recovery ahead of him after his leg injury and hypothermia. Brian thought long and hard about the whole story. He rethought his life values and became a volunteer after his recovery. Now he helps lonely old people. It doesn't bring money, but it brings calmness to the man's soul and he feels that he is helping people. One day Brian had a very busy day at work, a lot of things piled up. After work he drove to visit several people under his care. He brought some of their favorite treats, had a little talk and came home. Tired and without energy, he went to sleep. And he had a dream. Helen was walking along a dark and deserted road. She came close and looked at him. Then she smiled and said that she forgave him. Brian woke up with a smile on his face. Dear friend, if you liked the story, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Have a good time and see you all again.